Lyddie, Chapter 8, Number 5, Concord Corporation, Part 1. At first she thought it was the bear, clanging the oatmeal pot against the furniture, but then the tiny attic came alive with girls. One struck a stick against a box, making the flash and odor of a tiny hell, and all this was just to light a candle that barely softened the pre-dawn gloom of the attic. In the clatter of 5 girls dressing and squabbling over a single basin, Lyddie was forced fully awake and began to remember where she was. Filthy as she had been, Mrs. Bedloe, the coachman's sister, had kindly taken her in. The boarding-house keeper hurriedly gave her brother a cup of tea and sent him on his way, and then she had her son, a boy about Charlie's age, fill a tub of hot water in her own bedroom and ordered Lyddie to bathe. The mud-caked dress and shawl she carried away as soon as Lyddie shed them and plopped them directly into a pot of boiling water on the black iron cook stove. And what a stove it was! Lyddie had only heard rumors of such modern wonders, and when she came in from the boarding-house keeper's bedroom, her face scrubbed barn-red, her warm, lazy body straining every seam of her one remaining dress, the first thing her eyes lit upon was the stove. She stared at it as though it was an exotic monster from the depths of the sea. If she could have chosen, Lyddie would have pulled a chair close to it and felt its wonderful warmth and studied its marvels. But Mrs. Bedloe urged her into the dining-room, which was so filled with a noisy army of almost 30 young women, still full of energy after her long day in the factory. Lyddie's own head nearly settled into the plate of pork and beans, so that long before the others had finished, Mrs. Bedloe helped her up the 4 flights of stairs to the attic room, where she fell into bed, hardly awake enough to mumble thanks for the woman's kindness. And now, on their first morning of her new life, she lay in bed a few minutes to relish the quiet of the empty attic. 3 days rattling in a coach, then to share a room with 5 others, indeed a bed with a stranger who woke Lyddie in the middle of the night with her tossing and her snoring, to be clanged awake by a bell, and to have her head punctured by shrieks and squeals and the rattles of voices. It made the windowless alcove she had left behind at Cutler's Seam a haven of peace, but she would not look back. She threw off the quilt. She had nothing to wear but her much too small homespun. It couldn't be helped. She dressed herself and padded down the 4 flights of stairs in her darned and her redarned stockings. The front room was crowded with the 2 large dining tables that Tim, Mrs. Bedloe's son, was scurrying to set. Wonderful smells of coffee and apple pie and hash. Would it be fish? Wafted through the house from the magical stove, as though to prove how many separate wonders it could perform at once. "I've left my boots," Lyddie started. Mrs. Bedloe looked up, her round face radiant from the heat. "They're by the stove, drying, but they won't do you know, eh? Your clothes, your boots, they simply won't do. That dress is only fit now to be burned, or what's left of it. I'm afraid it turned to mud stew in my kettle. What could my crazy brother have been thinking of letting a mere girl—" "Oh, it wasn't his fault, ma'am," said Lyddie, slipping her feet into Trevania's boots, now stiff from a night beside the stove. "It was the men. They were so stupid. You needn't tell me. I know that brother of mine. He was sitting on top, laughing, not giving a word of direction." "But, ma'am, he had the coach and the team." "Nonsense! He does it to amuse himself and humiliate his betters. He'd wreck a coach if he thought it would give him a rollicking story to tell in the tavern that night, and all at the cost of your clothes and dignity." "Well, I ain't lost much either way. Have you any money at all?" Lyddie hesitated. She really didn't. It was Trefania's money, not her own. "If I'm to recommend you to the Concord Corporation, you need to look decent. They like to hire a good class of girls here." Lydia reddened. "Of course, you're as good as anyone, a better worker than most, I suspect, but at the factory they'll look at your clothes and your shoes to decide. The Almighty may look at the heart, but man looketh on the outward appearance, as the good books say. And that goes for women too, I fear. So you'll have to do better than—" She looked sadly at Lydia's tight homespun and stiff worn boots. Lyddie hung her head. "I have a bit left over from the trip, but it's on loan. You can pay it back after you're working. Now, would you like to give me a hand? I think the girls will be home for breakfast early. The river's too high and the mill wheels are likely slowing. It means a holiday for them, but not for me." Lydia hastened to grab a cloth and take a pie Mrs. Bedloe was removing from the bowels of the stove. "Yes," Mrs. Bedloe continued, "there'll be a few days off now till the water goes down." She smiled. "Time enough to get you proper clothes and a place in the factory as well." This is the end of Part 1 of Chapter 8.